Good morning, everyone. It's August the 10th, and this is Dynamic Dialogue. So we're going to get started here. We're going to talk about supplier relationships and leveraging them today. So again, this is our Dynamic Dialogue webinar series. We do this the second and the fourth Tuesday of every month. We have a new time. We're starting at 11:15, and our aim is to end about noon. It's a open forum, open to thoughts, ideas, questions, other suggestions, resources, whatever turns your fancy regarding supply chain. We're open to that. We're going to go again 11:15 Pacific Daylight Time for now. And the link that you had to join us is good between now and the end of the year. We do have a subscription that you can sign up to, so that reduces a little bit of the emails that you get. And I do send the link out every day prior to the event. So we're just going to go ahead and get started now with the supplier relationship. I belong to ISM, and I know several of you do too. So I always kind of go back to ISM definitions. Their definition for supplier relationship management is very short and sweet. There are others that I found researching this particular and similar presentations that are very long, but they define it as the practice and process for interacting with suppliers. So that covers a lot. It leaves a lot open. So some of the notes that are around that I want to make, and you'll see more of that in the presentation, is that SRM does not really apply to all suppliers. And please note that I use SRM for supplier relationship management. SRM is also supplier risk management. And so depending on whether you're talking about relationships or risk, you might see that same acronym. And if you just Google SRM, you'll get a few other uses of that acronym. So for this particular presentation today, everything that says SRM refers to supplier relationship management. Doesn't apply to 100% of your suppliers. It does mean the practices and processes in the company, and that's going to vary from company to company. Not everybody does the same thing with supplier relationship management, nor should they, because companies are different. Their markets are different, their suppliers are different, their commodities or their categories are different, and they have different challenges they're dealing with. So the practices and processes that your company adopts should fit your company and not worry too much about what other companies are doing. It's always good to benchmark and look around and see what other people are doing, but don't feel like you have to copy somebody else very specifically. SRM is adopted by a lot of companies because they want to get more cost reductions, but the benefits far exceed cost reduction, and that isn't the only thing that you should have as a goal to start a supplier relationship management program. You should be looking for much more than cost reductions. And if that's really all you're looking for, you're probably going to be disappointed with the results that you get out of an SRM program. You do have to have some people involved that understand strategic thinking, because strategic thinking is an important part of that to develop the strategies that you need and to get the most out of these relationship programs. It also requires both management, so upper management, and stakeholder support. That means you've got to have other people on the organization outside of the procurement or the supply chain organization. Key stakeholders that come to mind from my experience are people in production sometimes, quality almost always. If you have engineering design type people, you're going to need those. You might need some financial people in there. But you want to make sure that you're doing this from both sides, because you're going to need management support from your company, but you also need that support from the company that you're partnering with in this supplier relationship management. And please note that supplier relationship management complements supplier risk management. So they are not the same, and the way you go about them is a little bit different. But in fact, it's quite different, but you should never try to do one without doing the other. If you're looking at supplier risk management, those suppliers that you identify that have risk are probably potential suppliers for you to include in a relationship management program. And if you're starting with supplier relationship management, you want to understand that discovering risk, uncovering risk, and partnering in risk management are all part of the goals of supplier relationship programs. And that should be part of the fact finding that you're doing with these suppliers. So that sounds like a lot of work. And the question I get often asked is, why should I bother with this? I don't have that many suppliers. I'm managing them just fine. We have good relationships. So why should we do anything else in above and beyond? So I found this particular graph, and I've seen different versions of this over time. This actually comes from a 2020 study, an article called Supplier Relationship Management, a framework for collaboration and innovation. And you'll see that what happens here is there's a lot of time prior to a sourcing event, whether that's an RFP, an RFQ, a full a bidding kind of contest, whatever you do for your sourcing event. And then you still got a lot of considerable time and effort into getting a contract signed. And that's not just issuing a PO, that's on a full-blown contract that you're getting lots of different aspects of that contract settled. So companies put in a lot of time and effort to get to that contract point. But above and beyond that, once you get the contract signed, that's really where the risk really can hurt you. And that's where the relationship is really going to kick in. So when you have supplier management and good supplier management and supplier development, you're going to continue to get value from that relationship. If you don't have supplier management or have weak supplier management, all the work that you've done up to that point is going to begin to erode pretty quickly, actually, and it's going to just deteriorate until you have very contentious relationships and you're not getting the value that you need. And with basic supplier management, from that point that you sign the contract, it actually levels off quite a bit. You don't get much more value from that supplier. Once you've done the contract, and assuming you've done the contract with good fundamentals and sound principles, and you put a good contract together, you still don't get much more value from that. And really what suppliers and customers need to keep in mind is that value needs to build for both parties over time. If your company's spending a lot of time doing strategic sourcing and you're not continuing to build on that activity and get more value out of it, then that's a lost opportunity. So it really is valuable to do. And add to that, that in another article I read from June of this year, it said almost 31% of the CPOs that they surveyed made a clear commitment to restructure their supplier relationships. Now, we know that COVID has had a big effect on a lot of things for us, and that we want to make sure that we continue to get this value. So companies are realizing, the CPOs are realizing, they are now going to make recommitment efforts to their relationships to build those and to continue to get that value from those relationships. Coming through the pandemic has been hard, and a lot of companies are still in the middle. There's a lot of issues. You can pick up any newspaper, turn on your phone any day of the week, and you'll see supply chain issues there. And a lot of these are not going away. So anytime soon, things like the chip issue is continuing. Even the ramifications from the freeze in the spring is not going away. A lot of the imports that you'll read, issues in containers, delays in transportation, all kinds of different things that are happening there. And so this is going to continue to be with us for the foreseeable future. So those relationships are really key to getting all of us through this and on the other side. So there's a few components that SRM has. And every article I read, every time I pick something up that says supplier relationship management, it always indicates the need to segment suppliers. And yet I continue to see and encounter organizations who really ignore that step, or they either lump all their suppliers in together, or they look at those suppliers with the highest spend and they say, okay, I've done my segmentation, I'm done. please, please, please don't do that way. Segmenting suppliers is much more complicated than looking at spend. Spend is definitely a component, but when you're looking at supplier relationship management, you need to look at all of the suppliers that are critical to your business, all the ones that really stand out, that help you achieve your company's goals. So that includes suppliers that may have intellectual property involved, either your intellectual property or their intellectual property. But if you're working on something that involves that, that's important. If suppliers have your tools, that they're making parts for you with tools that you bought and paid for, that's an important relationship. If they're a unique part that you've designed in, if they're a sole source, not necessarily single sources, although single sources may need to be in there too. But if they're truly sole sources, then they probably need to be in your list of key suppliers for supplier relationship management. So it is important to understand that not all suppliers are the same, have the same value to your company, and so that you focus in on the few that are going to give you the best return on this investment. Then you have supplier strategies, and companies need supplier strategies for a lot of different reasons. Strategy is a word that scares the heck out of people. It sounds big, it sounds important, it sounds like it's really hard to do, that you have to be really smart to come up with a strategy. People think that only top leaders can or should be the ones creating strategies, but that's really not the case. Strategies are simply plans that help you achieve your goals. If you don't have specific goals, then it's really hard to come up with strategies that are of much use. But strategies at the bare essence really tell you we're going to do more of something or we're going to do less of something. We're going to achieve a goal by improving something or changing something. We need something changed or we need to do better with something. It should include things that you should stop doing, things that are not working, but it should also emphasize the things that you're doing well and you should continue to do. And if you see some gaps, then the things that you start doing are important, the things that you want to start doing between you. So these strategies need to be done first from the company, from the customer perspective, and say, these are the strategies I have. At the very basic strategy I always use when I teach my college classes is to say, revenue minus expense equals profits. If I'm going to increase profits, I need to either increase revenue, decrease expenses, or do something on both a little bit and make sure I do it in the right proportions. So if I don't decrease my expenses very much and I don't increase my revenue, my profit margin can actually change to the negative. So you want to make sure that you do that in the right proportion. And strategies are just that simple. It's the way you're going to achieve that goal. So you have to think about the goals that you're trying to achieve. What are you trying to do with that supplier? What does that supplier do for your company? And make sure that your strategies are in support of that. And then you're going to need actions to execute these strategies. Those actions are going to include owners of each action, and that might be owners on both sides. The supplier is going to do something and the customer is going to do something else to check it. Maybe the customer is going to do something for the supplier, like give better forecasts or give more frequent forecasts or give more timely reports on delivery and quality. These actions should have timelines or schedules. This is when we're going to do this. This is how often we're going to get together to review this. This is the timing that needs to be there. Otherwise, it'll be something that, well, I'll get around to it eventually. And if you've seen that, you know what the round to it is. It ends up being the trash and you don't get anything done. And then you need to make sure that you have scorecards to assess this progress, but these are going to be two-way. This is not just a customer tells the supplier what they think. This is really that the customer shares their perspective, but you also have to give the supplier adequate time and sufficient time to share their perspective of how you're doing as a customer. Some customers don't like to hear that they're a real pain in the neck customer. And if you are a pain in the neck customer, and I've been in that situation, you might as well own it. Yes, we are hard to deal with. We are difficult. We make a lot of changes. So how can we do that more readily that's less painful for both of us, both me as a customer and inflicting pain on you as a supplier? That is not my desire, is to be the taskmaster just whipping my suppliers one way or another. It's really to make sure that we're working together on this. And so therefore, SRM needs to contain key stakeholders. You need a contact matrix. You need to know who's who in this zoo of relationship. So that's not only the key procurement people, the account manager and the buyer or the category manager, whatever you call them. And it's not even just their immediate managers, but it's all of those other people that work with and through those suppliers. So it could be, again, design engineers, quality people. It could be warehouse managers or warehouse leads who understand that they're the ones that are unpacking things and seeing what comes in from the supplier. So if there's issues in delivery or paperwork or any of that, that could be a person. It's often somebody in finance to make sure on the customer side, the accounts payable, to make sure your suppliers are getting paid properly and timely, because there's nothing worse for a relationship than a customer who's not paying the supplier in a timely fashion or as per the needs of that supplier, what the terms they agreed on. So you want to make sure that you've got somebody in that loop as well. And in case there's any problems with invoices or, again, packing lists or documentation, any of that. So you've got the contact matrix. This is who I go to. This is who the quality engineer is on my product on this part of the line that I go to. So as a customer, you know who to go to. As a supplier, you know who to go to. But you also need escalation paths. So you don't want to be surprised when you have an issue. You want to know who these main players are on both sides. These are multifaceted relationships. And so you need to make sure that you know who they are and then the escalation path. That escalation path is really important because you need to know who to go to when you either can't find someone or not getting a response that's quick enough or satisfactory enough. And you need to know who to alert when you have extra emphasis on an area that's a problem. Because especially in these days with the pandemic, with people working from home, it's hard sometimes to get hold of people. And there's not people that you can just look up and down and say, oh, well, yeah, let me help you with that. You don't just answer the phone and there's people there that can jump on that. You have to get hold of people. So having these contact matrices with names, with email addresses, with phone numbers that are going to be answered and people are going to respond, that you can text. Having that is very important. So when something does happen, then you know who you go to first. And if that's not working, you know who to go to next. But along with that, it's that escalation path is not there just because I'm unhappy with Bob, so I'm going to go to Joan, and I'm unhappy with her, so I'm going to go to Sarah, and then I'm going to go to Steve. And if that takes the general manager, then I'm going to get this resolved. That's not what that's about. It's really built around having strategies, again, plans for how you're going to resolve issues. So people know where to go, they know who to contact first, and they know kind of what they should expect. So you should have strategies around, hey, if I have a problem, I want acknowledgement of that problem within 24 hours. I want a first pass understanding of what that problem is from your side, your perspective, within 48 hours or maybe 72 hours. And that can be a delivery problem, a quality problem. That can be a proposal question. I want questions answered within, again, acknowledged within 24 hours. So that means if you're going to be out, if you're not going to have somebody on site, maybe they get to take a vacation, then they should have a backup. And in case they're out on an emergency basis, then that's when the contact matrix comes into play. If I can't reach my primary contact, who do I reach next? And then pose my question, forward my email, leave a voicemail, whatever you need to do to go through that resolution strategy to make sure that you can get things resolved. So it's a little more complicated, but having this discussion and having these owners for everything makes it a lot smoother when you actually have a problem. I know from being a manager and a mid-level manager in many companies, I hated to confront a supplier for the first time when I didn't know anybody from that team. I hated to make a cold call to say, hey, we got a real serious problem here. And I hated it when I got called and they said, hey, we got a real serious problem here. When you don't know that person, when you've never met and you really barely know their name or don't know their name, it's a lot more difficult, a lot harder to get a resolution because everybody, there's no trust, there's no understanding, there's no mutual agreement on how this is going to get resolved. So don't put yourself in that situation. So I usually use these 5 steps to SRM. Again, segment your suppliers and really, really choose wisely. Pick a small number. If you want to institute a whole SRM program, that's great. Don't start with 30% of your suppliers. Start with a few key suppliers, and then you can add on from there. Once you get this process going, once you get an understanding from the team on what can be done, how this is going to work, then you can add suppliers in. So I highly recommend that you do a pilot with a couple of key suppliers. Probably don't pick the one that's the most challenging to pilot. So choose wisely when you do this. Roll this out incrementally, but make sure you're really including the suppliers and their management team so that you've got this formal invite to them that says, we want to work with you. We want to expand our relationship. We're implementing a supplier relationship program. We want you to be part of it. You're important to our business. We recognize the importance to our business and that we are also important to you. So once you choose your suppliers, then you really have to set a baseline on the performance. So again, you're going to have these strategies. You should have done this as an organization, as a customer perspective, saying this is the performance that we perceive, and this is why we want them in this program, and these are our preliminary goals. But you really need to set a baseline. So you need this baseline to include perspectives from both organizations so that you're not arguing back and forth about, well, that wasn't late because we did this, and this wasn't on time because we didn't get it until this date. So look at your baseline. You can do this independently. Both organizations can do a baseline. You want to set goals for improving once you reconcile the baselines and say, okay, we understand this. Establish metrics on what you're going to measure, how frequently you're going to measure, how you're going to report that to each other. This should not be something that you share just amongst yourselves, that as a customer, you're only looking at it as a customer and only letting the customer see it until you have your business review. And then surprise, here's all our results. It doesn't mean that you have to report every week either, unless it's something that you both agree needs to be reported on a weekly basis. So the metrics, what you're going to measure, how frequently you're going to measure that, who's going to measure that, who's going to check it from the other side to make sure that you agree with that. And part of that really is saying, how in the heck are we going to measure it? This is how we measure it. If you measure it in a different way, we need to understand that so that we can make sure that we don't end up always discussing the difference in measurement techniques versus the results, because that's what you want to get to, is these are the results that are either making me happy or not making me happy as a company. And this is what we need to change, do better, keep doing. So make sure that methodology for measuring is agreed upon as well. And then you want to collaborate. Okay, where do we go from here? We know that we want to get better at these 2 things. We know we want to keep doing these things. These things are not adding any value, so we're not going to do those anymore. But where do we go from here? What's the next step for our 2 companies? So this needs to be a win-win, not something that I'm just trying to get an incremental bump in cost reduction out of, and I'm going to kick you to the curb next year. So it needs to have a little bit of vision, a little bit of longevity to it, because these are relationships that you should be looking at as long-term relationships. This is going to require some data sharing, some open kimono type things, some transparency from both organizations. Both organizations need to say, this is what our roadmap is. This is what we're doing. This is what our plans are for growth, for expansion, for contraction, for acquisitions, all of these things. So you need to have some transparency, which means you need to have confidentiality agreements in place, which you should have with any supplier that comes into this kind of program. And you need to make sure that you caution the members that are present when you have these discussions, that these discussions stay in this room. We are working on this collaboratively, trying to get some things together. But if the supplier tells us that they are working on a big contract, that they anticipate hiring people, or they just lost a contract and they anticipate laying people off, that is not something that you run back and tell everybody else in your organization. And you sure don't mention it necessarily to the people that you're dealing with on the other side in the case of the reduction of force, unless they have that as public knowledge too. So you need to be respectful of these boundaries, but they also need to have that transparency for you to come up with the best solutions for both organizations. And you need to establish these mutual goals. This is what we're going to do. We're going to help you grow, but we would like to get more business from you. So if we help you with this one project, what other projects can we be included on? The supplier is going to want to know what they can get out of it as well. So as a customer, this is where that strategic thinking comes in. You need to say more than just, this is what's in it for us. This is what's in it for the supplier. So what kinds of incentives, what kinds of new business, what kind of things are going on with our company that would be beneficial to the supplier as well? And this is how we want to work together on that. So you want to improve both as a supplier and a customer. So you want improvements from your supplier. That's why part of why you started this program in the first place. But also you want to get better as a customer. As a customer, like I said, I've been a pain in the neck customer. I know that. That involves everything from lousy forecast to no forecast to lots of changes to anything you can think of. So as a customer, what can you do to help your supplier? So you need to pay attention to what they're asking for. You need to understand how your forecasts are used, the information that you share with them, your orders, how they do their business, so that you understand how your ordering patterns affect them. And so you need to improve your supplier, but you need to be a better customer as well. And then finally, this step is really, really important. You need to recognize and understand when you have achieved something. When you get improvements, you need to recognize that. You need to reward that. You need to celebrate that. You need to do that collaboratively. You need to do that individually. There are people on your team that may rise to an occasion. You need to recognize them, and you need to recognize them across both organizations. For example, you might have a quality engineer who figures something out on a quality problem, and it might be their engineer, it might be your engineer, but whoever it is, you need to say, hey, this person worked in this capacity, came up with this solution, and enabled us to achieve this goal, or enabled us to handle that challenge, that issue expeditiously and without too much of an impact. So be prepared to recognize the wins, the people that are involved in that, the person or people, to reward those and celebrate. Everybody likes money for a reward, and people say, well, I don't have any budgets. I don't have any way to do that. And I'm going to tell you, yes, you do. Rewards can be certificates and a decent frame that costs about 10 or 12 bucks at a local frame store or a local craft store like Michael's. And something that you can print out that has some colors on it that looks nice, get it signed by some people that are significant. That's a reward. You can get fancy plaques that suppliers can hang on in their lobbies. You can treat people to lunch, even remotely. You can treat people to lunch. There's a lot of services now that you can send credits to people, and they have a code so they can go into Uber Eats or Lyft Eats or any of these other organizations, and they can order something, and you can say, hey, go get lunch and we're going to have a Zoom meeting to celebrate this. If you can send something through the mail to people, that's a good thing. Amazon, and you can send things like Amazon gift cards electronically. You don't even have to put it in the United States mail. You can just go online, put their email in and say, hey, here's a gift card. Thanks for your help. So there's a lot of ways to do that don't cost a lot of money. And it really does recognize people and keep people motivated to continue working on that. So that's the fifth step. There are consequences that you may have seen from poor supplier relationship management. You get more disruptions because your communication isn't clear, it isn't crisp, it isn't consistent. So there's misunderstandings of things. There's not as much follow-up. There's not as much involvement on teams from both sides. So you have more disruptions. If poor SRM can delay product launches. So like I say, when you're looking at who to include in your SRM program, and this is one of the errors of just looking at spend. If you have a new supplier who's working on a new product, your spend with them is probably going to be very low, or you're going to have no actual direct spend because all you've bought from them maybe is some prototypes or initial production run. So your spend is going to be low. But if that's your new product that you're banking on helping your company, then that supplier becomes a lot more important than the dollars that you've spent. So one thing I say, if you're going to use a spend analysis, which is a good component to include, don't always just look at history, but look at your forecast spend as well. So you may not have spent a lot of money with this supplier maybe during the pandemic, but 2022 looks like it's going to rock and roll and you're going to spend a lot of money with them. So that raises them up in priority. So, but you don't want those product launches to be delayed because you don't have good relationships. It can hurt your brand image, and the marketing people will tell you that when you take a black eye to your brand, it can take a year, 2 years or more to build that customer trust back up. So this is not an area that you want to get tarnished as your brand. You can have infractions like regulatory infractions that come with penalties and different things. So relationship management can really go a long way to helping make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it, and how they're supposed to do it to reduce things like that. You're going to miss cost reduction opportunities because you're not looking at anything past the price that you're paying. You're not looking at what it takes for them to produce that. You're going to have continuous changes that impact both parties because, again, you don't have common goals. You don't have common strategies. You haven't spent the time to figure out where you're both going. And so you're going to both be changing in different directions at different rates of speed, or one changes and the other doesn't. So there, again, not only cost reduction opportunities, but untapped savings in things like productivity, efficiency, the amount of time that you spend with suppliers, the amount of orders that you issue to suppliers, the time it takes to manage them can be a big deal and involve a lot more aspects of things if you don't have these programs in place. And you can just overall be inefficient. You're not using the technology to its fullest. You're not using your people to their potential, and you're wasting capital in maybe terms of tools or any kinds of other areas that you're spending money, dollars, that you could be actually getting some savings from that. So making that an investment and recouping savings from that investment. So there's consequences there. But there are lots of benefits when you have good SRM. So there may be a cost to that, and you have to always weigh out what's the cost versus the benefit. But one of the things that really comes out of supplier relationship programs is that you have mutual trust and respect. So that's why I say these are good programs to launch in the scenario that you have a new supplier that's on a new product that you think is going to be a big player. You want to start early with these SRM programs because you're going to build some trust that can help you overcome some of the challenges that you have. And you don't have to have a long-term working relationship if you start with the program basics that say, we're sharing what we need, what we want, our expectations. You're sharing what's going well for you and what we're doing to drive you and your company crazy. And we're going to work on that together. You're going to have transitions that are much smoother and much shorter, regardless of what the transition is. Launching a new product, end of lifing a product, cutting a change in, moving from person A to person B. If somebody gets promoted or somebody leaves your company or leaves their company, you're going to get much smoother and shorter transitions in any kind of change that happens. You're going to have value that both parties see increased. And we talk about increasing value and value add a lot, but I always go back to, what does that mean for your company? Because value add to one company is not necessarily value add to another. So you have to say, what do we value here? What gives us value from a supplier or from a customer? And then again, that goes back to understanding that, creating your strategy so that you can increase that value. You're going to be able to reduce risk. You're going to be able to put in better mitigation plans on both sides. And oftentimes you're going to be able to share that risk so that your company doesn't have to assume all of it, that you're going to get some help in some way, shape, or form from your partner doing that. You're going to get teams that are much more proactive than reactive because they understand this team better. They know these people. They know who's on the team. They know how to get things done. You're going to get higher levels of supplier engagement, which is going to lead to stronger bonds with those suppliers. When you have both parties invested in the outcome of something, you're going to get a lot better response. You're going to get the whole team on the supplier side is going to know who you are as a customer, what they're doing for you as a customer, and be excited about that. And it never hurts when you can visit to take things like t-shirts or pens or coffee mugs or anything that has your company logo on it. And if you have a particular project and you can share that, to have that given out to them is a big deal too. And it will have fewer interruptions to your business on both sides. So that's an important thing. You're going to see people more willing to share ideas, to be more creative. Therefore, you're going to get innovation increased. Innovation is a very hard thing to define. It's very hard to measure. But when you have two companies who are really working together and you see that synergy, you're going to see what you call more innovation going on. And these SRM programs really are a competitive advantage. So look at your competitors. Which companies are your biggest competitors? What are they doing in this? You need to do the same and more, because this can really be a competitive advantage, especially when you have suppliers who can pick and choose their customers a little more. You want to be a customer that your suppliers want to work with, want more business with, and want to put their resources and energy into working with you. So the title of this presentation was to leverage. So how do you leverage this? I just talked about what is a good supplier relationship management. I'm going to tell you some ways to leverage it. Remember that suppliers are partners. They need you as much as you need them, and sometimes more. It's not always a 50-50 balance. They used to say marriage is 50-50. Nowadays, they say it's more like 70-30 or even 80-20. You just hope that you get the 70 or the 80 side 50% of the time. So supplier relationships are the same. They're not necessarily 50-50, but they should be overall balanced, that you're meeting the needs and a lot of the wants of both organizations. SRM helps you build trust and respect. And the best way to get through a challenge is when you trust and respect the other party, and you can figure out how to get through that issue together. It's going to help you plan better. It's going to help you get a better solution. It's going to help you get a quicker solution. And you're not going to be arguing about nits on things. You're going to say, okay, we'll do that for you because we need you to do this for us. And yes, there's going to be cost, there's going to be pain, there's going to be this, but you're going to get through it together more readily and overall with less pain to both sides. Also, strategies are two-way streets. So companies come up with strategies so they can beat the competition, so they can do this, so they can get their goals. But you have to remember that these are going to be both ways. So you don't want to limit the activities to just what the supplier is going to do. You have to look at how your company can change as a customer to work with this particular supplier. And sometimes that's very customized, and sometimes it's doing things that you don't do for other suppliers. And you know what? Sometimes you have to just do that. So you have to figure out what's working, what's not, what are you going to do? And keep in mind that these are means to achieve the goals. This is what you're doing to get your goals and to help your suppliers stay viable so they can stay a good, solid supplier. So you're going to have to share ideas, data, and information. Sometimes you have to be more transparent than you want to be. Sometimes you have to share things that are more on the confidential level. Again, that's why that trust and respect are so important, because you are more likely to share things that are a little bit maybe risky or a little bit maybe unflattering with somebody that you respect and trust. If your company's in financial straits, the best thing to do is to tell a supplier, hey, we're having some financial issues. We'd like to lengthen your payment terms from 30 days to 40 days because this is an issue for us. It's better to tell that, and it's not a good thing to ask. It's not an easy thing to ask, but suppliers are often more willing to take on those things. Vice versa, if your supplier says they're having cash flow problems, they don't want that announced from the trees either. But then if you can help them out and shorten their payment terms, even for a short period of time, then that's a good thing. Or make a down payment, a deposit when you issue the purchase order to help their cash flow. You'll figure out ways that you can work together better. So to leverage it, you want to become both a better customer and supplier. So as you as a customer realize what you're doing to your suppliers, it's really important that you get with your customer relationship management people. There's a lot of companies that have big, extravagant, detailed programs on customer relationship management, but they don't put any time or energy into supplier relationship. And I always say that's very imbalanced. But then if you do have both, you need to make sure that you're sharing those learnings and you're going back to that so that you're applying that to the other party, whether you're the customer or the supplier. And I've made a big point today of saying that SRM is not for every supplier, but it doesn't mean that you don't learn things that will help you be a better customer to suppliers that maybe aren't in this bucket of supplier relationship management. You should be able to become a better customer in general, and that will help you with suppliers that are outside of these programs. So what I know for sure is there's a better way to utilize supplier relationship management. Remember that suppliers are partners. They're extensions of your production line. They're extensions of your business, and there is a mutual need on both sides. They need you, you need them. So you might as well acknowledge that and work to that end. Again, SRM and CRM are linked. So make sure that you're sharing back and forth and becoming better at both. Risk is everywhere. If nothing else, we've learned so many different types of risks, so many different types of issues from this last year and a half during the pandemic. So make sure that you put risk reduction into your relationship management. It shouldn't replace that, but they should go hand in hand. SRM is great, and you're going to get trust, and you're going to get respect, and you're going to be able to reach solutions and agreements more quickly. But don't forget, you still have to document. Just because you trust somebody and you're on the phone or maybe on a Zoom meeting and you say, okay, this is going to work. You guys are going to do this. This person's going to do this. We're going to do that. That's great. Make sure you still document that. You need to make sure that there's documentation, that there's schedules, all of those things through an email, through notes from the meeting, however it is. It doesn't mean that you don't need a contract. It just means you ought to be able to reach the details of the contract more quickly. Your plans, and also you've got to have some metrics. You've got to have documented metrics to say, what are we measuring on each other? Not just a one-way street, but what are we measuring and how is that working and how is it not? So SRM does need some time and resources. That I have people say, we're so thin, we're spread so thin, we can't do this. We don't have time. We don't have a person to dedicate to that. If your people are talking to suppliers, they have time to do a little bit of SRM. And this is really an area where some is better than none. So if you've got category managers, commodity managers, lead people who are dealing with these suppliers, project leads, maybe new product interface people, then you've got resources to do this. They just need to incorporate some of these things into what else they're doing. So it's not going to overburden anybody, but if you've got to get them to think about this as a supplier relationship management aspect of all the other supplier management activities they're doing. So these relationships will help you achieve your goals, but remember, you've got to have win-win outcomes. If you're not trying to help your supplier win through this, then you're just another bully customer beating up on your supplier, trying to get that extra nickel out of them. You have to be willing to share and be transparent. You've got to be open to what your supplier's telling you that you're not doing so well, or that you're not doing at all, or that you're doing incorrectly, which means you have to listen. And that means not just one person, but your whole team listening to their team. Doesn't mean you have to acquiesce and do whatever they want, but it means you need to listen and look for mutually agreeable solutions. So that's what I have for dynamic dialogue today. Next time in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about capacity planning. And then September, we're going to talk about non-compliance with lots of different things. So stay tuned for those. Those are coming up. There's our website. You can go to that, the events page, and that's where a lot of these things are. It's a little bit behind, but it should get updated shortly. You can always contact me at jane@purplelink.net. If you would like to discuss this or any other topic, you can do a callwithjane.com. That takes you to my calendar. You can sign up for some time, and I'm happy to talk about any of these or other topics about how Purple Link can help your business. We are planning some events for the fall. CPSM, if you're not familiar with that, ISM certification is a certified professional in supplier management. I'm planning an exam 3 class in September. So it's not too early to sign up for that. That should be on the website. We're doing a risk-based thinking and decision-making, kind of a quick 1.5 hours a week for 3 weeks, starting September 9th. I'm going to do some lean and Six Sigma, heavy on the lean, very light on the Six Sigma. Same thing, 1.5 hours a week for 3 weeks, starting in October. And I want to leave you with one thought. Mark Cuban, many of you may know him from Shark Tank. He's one of the investors there. He's a billionaire, owns the Dallas Mavericks, has a long history with tech companies, but he had this quote that I thought was very appropriate, that business happens over years and years. Value is measured in the total upside of a business relationship, not by how much you squeezed out in any one deal. So he believes this is in it for the long run. So the people that you're doing business with, the companies, it's really up to the people, and it's really about these relationships. So that's what I have for supplier relationships today. I'm going to stop the recording, but I will take questions.